Hey crew, it's Pitt, and I am back with some hyperbole. Today we are going to be looking at the plan for the end of the world. At least if you listen to a certain group of people. This is the outline for how Donald Trump is going to impose his tyranny. I, on the other hand, happen to know that this is a private group who has absolutely no say in what is actually implemented, but are instead talking about their opinions and where they think that the country should be headed in order for us to once again be great. I'm going to read this aloud. That is what we do here. I'm going to read it in accordance with the Declaration of Independence, with the Constitution and all the amendments, and with the Federalist Papers, which I have also read aloud. And so we will be discussing what is contained in this entire document, piece by piece. It is going to be broken up into digestible chunks. I'm going to do it with a slightly right-leaning center, right? I am very much center. I'm as close to the center as you can be and still want to conserve our government and the way that it works. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, you should check out some of my other playlists. With all of that being said, I'm going to dive into this knowing full well that a whole lot of people don't want to hear it read aloud. They don't want to have their hyperbole bust. But I am going to do it. We will talk about this in ways that every American should be discussing these things. Some of these things I am sure I will agree with, and some of them I am sure that I will not agree with, and I will tell you the reasons for and against where it is appropriate. This is my opinion channel. If you have a different opinion, you are more than welcome to leave it down below if you are respectful. I have no problem blocking people if they are disrespectful or if they get out of the box, so keep that in mind. No name calling, but anything else is pretty much we can talk about. With all of that being said, let's dive into this. We're going to do the foreword today. We will be doing all of it. It will probably take a good bit of time because I am going to read it and discuss it. This is the foreword, A Promise to America by Kevin D. Roberts, Ph.D. 44 years ago, the United States and the conservative movement were in dire straits. Both had been betrayed by the Washington establishment and were uncertain whom to trust. Both were internally splintered and strategically adrift. Worse still, at that moment of acute vulnerability and division, we found ourselves besieged by existential adversaries, foreign and domestic. The late 1970s were, by any measure, a historic low point for America and the political coalition dedicated to preserving its unique legacy of human flourishing and freedom. Today, America and the conservative movement are enduring an era of division and danger akin to the late 1970s. Now, as then, our political class has been discredited by wholesale dishonesty and corruption. Look at America under the ruling and cultural elite today. Inflation is ravaging family budgets. Drug overdose deaths continue to escalate, and children suffer the toxic normalization of transgenderism, with drag queens and pornography invading their school libraries. Overseas, a totalitarian communist dictatorship in Beijing is engaged in a strategic, cultural, and economic Cold War against America's interests, values, and people. All while globalist elites in Washington awaken only slowly to that growing threat. Moreover, low-income communities are drowning in addiction and government dependence. Contemporary elites have even repurposed the worst ingredients of 1970s radical chic to build the totalitarian cult known today as the Great Awakening. And now, as then, the Republican Party seems to have little understanding about what to do. Most alarming of all, the very moral foundations of our society are in peril. All right, we're going to stop at the end right here before we get into the next page. So far, right, there's nothing really inaccurate, right? We're talking a little bit about history. I am not well versed in that. I was born in 77. I have a fairly firm grasp from the mid-80s forward, but I have not spent the appropriate amount of time studying history. So the 70s are a bit of a mystery to me. So I can't get into how the culture was doing then. I know some of the things from the 60s because everybody learns about the things in the 60s. I'm not that aware of things in the 70s. I know about the 80s because I lived them. I know about the 90s because I lived them, and I know what was going on then. I was quite anti-establishment at that point in time, right? In the 90s, into the 2000s, I was very much anti-establishment. I joined the Navy because I was required to by the court. I got out of the Navy and I went into construction and dealing drugs. I don't do those things. I don't condone those things. I don't encourage those things, but that is where I came from. So I understand both sides of many of these issues because of that. The conservative movement did not really even become a thing to me until I started actually doing research into actual things that actually affected my life. Why do we have inflation? I started looking into that and I understood that printing money causes inflation. The drug overdose and all these things. I understand that that is because of the Democratic policies. We can talk about that for an entire hour by itself. And so there are many things in this that we do need to address. Basic biology being one of them. The communist dictatorship in Beijing, that is a problem, but it is not that big of a problem because communism is not that effective. Right? They have a whole lot of people, but they don't know what to do with them. They are not a cohesive fighting force. They do not do well in conflicts. So that is a problem. Our domestic issues are a much greater issue. More focus should absolutely be placed here than is currently being placed. I am not a textbook Republican, right? I registered Republican in 2016 because I wanted to vote against Trump in the primary. I voted for John Kasich. I understand that would have been a terrible idea now, but then I thought it would have been a great idea to have somebody more in the middle and a little bit less abrasive. I am a Trump supporter. Did vote for him all of the elections, and I will vote for him in this one, barring something horrendous, and there has been nothing horrendous. All right, I should have made this transition. This will be so that I can do my thing, but I should have made that transition before I started all that talking. My bad. All right, yeah, students of history will note that. Notwithstanding all those challenges, the late 1970s proved to be the moment when the political right unified itself and the country and led the United States to historic political, economic, and global victories. The Heritage Foundation is proud to have played a small but pivotal role in that story. It was in early 1979, amid stagflation, gas lines, and the Red Army's invasion of Afghanistan, the nadir of Jimmy Carter's day of malaise, that Heritage launched the Mandate for Leadership project. We brought together hundreds of conservative scholars and academics across the conservative movement. Together, this team created a 20-volume, 3,000-page governing handbook containing more than 2,000 conservative policies to reform the federal government and rescue the American people from Washington dysfunction. It was a promise from the conservative movement to the country, confident, specific, and clear. Mandate for Leadership was published in January of 1981, the same month Ronald Reagan was sworn into his presidency. By the end of that year, more than 60% of its recommendations had become policy, and Reagan was on his way to ending stagflation, reviving American confidence and prosperity, and winning the Cold War. The bad news today is that our political establishment and cultural elite have once again driven America towards decline. The good news is that we know the way out, even though the challenges today are not what they were in the 1970s. Conservatives should be confident that we can rescue our kids, reclaim our culture, revive our economy, and defeat the anti-American left at home and abroad. We did it before and we'll do it again. As Ronald Reagan put it, freedom is a fragile thing, and it's never more than one generation away from extinction. It is not ours by way of inheritance. It must be fought for and defended constantly by each generation. This is the duty history has put before us and the standard by which our generation of conservatives will be judged. And we should not want it any other way. The legacy of Mandate for Leadership, and indeed of the entire Reagan Revolution, is that if conservatives want to save the country, we need a bold and courageous plan. This book is the first step in that plan. I do remember Reagan, right? I am old enough to remember the second term at least. I remember Iran-Contra. I remember all of those things. I wasn't well versed in it. I was young, but I remember it happening. I remember watching it on TV. I remember being somewhat interested in it. So I was very young. I understand. Oh, Reagan did a lot of great things. A lot of the economic turnaround that we had was because of him and because of the things that were instituted. A lot of our social and moral decline is also because of Reagan. That's going to piss off a whole lot of people, but if you look at it objectively, as I tend to try to do, we got no fault divorce through Reagan, and that in it by itself is a wow. And then we had a whole lot of implementations of policies that are keeping people down. That is a truth, whether you want to believe it or not. And so we need to revisit the way that we look at Reagan. Now, I used to be one of those people, right? 2016, I was like, give me a Reagan. Now I'm not so sure. Now, Reagan did a lot of good things. He did a lot of bad things too. The same problem is with Donald Trump, right? That he did a lot of really great things. No new wars, absolutely wonderful. I love that shit. Bringing our people home as much as he possibly could, I love it. I hate that they lied to him about the situation and kept more of them over there than he wanted. I hate that they broke the agreement that he had to withdraw our troops and we wound up with the fiasco that we did. I hate that, right? But I also hated the bump stop ban. I didn't like that at all. There was several things that he did towards the end that I didn't agree with, but I'm still going to vote for him because overall, I liked the policies that he put in place that had the best economy of my lifetime, and I lived through Reagan. The best economy of my lifetime. Right? People were buying houses, people were buying RVs, people were buying all kinds of frivolous things. They were enjoying their life. They were going to work. Yes, they were paying taxes. Yes, they were bitching about it, thinking they were being stolen from, right? Taxes are not theft. Taxes are a privilege. And so they were doing all of the things that a great, prosperous society will do in 2019. And then, just in time, things happened. Things changed. I understand. More than most people. I have been shadow banned for talking about it. So I don't talk about it here anymore. It's only on the alternatives. But regardless, I don't agree with any one person completely. And so we need to keep in mind that not everything that Reagan did was good. That is a hard thing for us to do looking back through history, but there were several things that were not great, right? Besides the no-fault divorce, which was a major problem. And now on to the next part. The Conservative Promise. This volume, The Conservative Promise, is the opening salvo of the 2025 Presidential Transition Project, launched by the Heritage Foundation and our many partners in April of 2022. Its 30 chapters lay out hundreds of clear and concrete policy recommendations for White House offices, cabinet departments, Congress, and agencies, commissions, and boards. Just as important as the scope of the Conservative Promise's recommendations is the breadth of its authorship. This book is the product of more than 400 scholars and policy experts from across the conservative movement and around the world. Contributors include former elected officials, world-renowned economists, and veterans from 4 presidential administrations. This is an agenda prepared by and for conservatives who will be ready on day 1 of the next administration to save our country from the brink of disaster. The Heritage Foundation is once again facilitating this work, but as our dozens of partners and hundreds of authors will attest, this book is the work of the entire conservative movement. As such, the authors express consensus recommendations already forged, especially along 4 broad fronts that will decide America's future. I did not go through the author list. It is going to be in the provided link down below, right? I always provide the link for the source documents in the box down below. It is always recommended that you go back and read it for yourself so that you understand the context and see if I'm leaving out any. That is part of my spiel. I have not consulted in the making of this, so it is not every conservative, right? There, we put it out there. But it is a lot of people. It is an awful lot of people. 400 people are listed as authors, and there are contributors, and there's a whole lot that we just did not read because it would take too much time to read out all the accolades for the people. That does not mean that every conservative will agree with every point, or else I would have no reason to be doing this video. But here are the 4 broad fronts that will decide America's future. Restore the family as the centerpiece of American life and protect children. Dismantle the administrative state and return self-governance to the American people. Defend our nation's sovereignty, borders, and bounty against global threats, and secure our God-given individual rights to live freely, what our Constitution calls the blessings of liberty. I absolutely agree with all 4 of those points. Most especially the fact that they started with number 1 there, because that is the most important part. What makes these 4 pieces of the conservative promise so valuable to the next president is that they cut through superficial distractions and focus on the moral and foundational challenges America faces in this moment of history. This was one of the secrets of conservative success in the Reagan era, one of our generation should emulate. As in the late 1970s, Americans today experience the failures of political and cultural elites in countless ways, in the job market and in the grocery store checkout lines, on the streets and in our schools, and the media, and within our institutions. But in truth, these daily dysfunctions are not innumerable problems, but innumerable manifestations of a few core crises. In 1979, the threats we faced were the Soviet Union, the socialism of 1970s liberals, and the predatory deviancy of cultural elites. Reagan defeated these beasts by ignoring their tentacles and instead striking at their hearts. His approach to the Cold War? We win and they lose. His economic agenda? The human dignity of work and its many rewards. His platform in the culture wars? The community of values embodied in these words: family, work, neighborhood, peace, and freedom. This book and Project 2025 as a whole will arm the next conservative president with the same kind of strategic clarity, but for a new age. So, this is telling us that this is their opinions, right? These people, these 400 authors, have come together to say that these are the things that are affecting us the most. These are the things that we need to focus on the most, and this is our plan for how that should be done. This is not the president's plan. This is not whoever is elected's plan. This is a group of conservatives who have decided to voice their opinion. They are voicing their opinion loudly, and the left is taking it as absolute what is going to happen. Now, I don't like hyperbole. I like to be informed. I like to be informed so that I know what is actually going on. I don't tend to get over the top about much of anything. I get a little bit wild in some of my conspiracies. That is an absolute truth. But it is all based in science and fact. I don't spit anything that I can't back up with at least a TED Talk. And so, next up, we are going to start reading through the promises here. This is the promise number 1. Restore the family as the centerpiece of American life and protect our children. This is, in my opinion, the most important thing that we can do. Your duty as an American citizen is to raise a good, happy family. That does not mean that everyone should be a parent or even raise a family. If you are not a functional human being, you should not be having children. And that is not to say that there should be any means taken to keep you from that at all. Okay. The next conservative president must get to work pursuing the true priority of politics, the well-being of the American family. In many ways, the entire point of centralizing political power is to subvert the family. Its purpose is to replace people's natural loves and loyalties with unnatural ones. You see this in the popular left-wing aphorism: government is simply the name we give to the things we choose to do together. But in real life, most of the things people do together have nothing to do with government. These are the mediating institutions that serve as the building blocks of any healthy society: marriage, family, work, church, school, volunteering. The name real people give to the things we do together is community, not government. Our lives are full of interwoven and overlapping communities, and our individual and collective happiness depend upon them. But the most important community in each of our lives and the life of the nation is the family. Today, the American family is in crisis. 40% of all children are born to unmarried mothers, including more than 70% of black children. There is no government program that can replace the hole in a child's soul cut out by the absence of a father. Fatherlessness is one of the principal sources of American poverty, crime, mental illness, teen suicide, substance abuse, rejection of the church, and high school dropouts. So many of the problems government programs are designed to solve but can't are ultimately problems created by the crisis of marriage and the family. The world has never seen a thriving, healthy, free, and prosperous society where most children grow up without their married parents. If current trends continue, we are heading towards a social implosion. Furthermore, the next conservative president must understand that using government alone to respond to symptoms of the family crisis is a dead end. Federal power must instead be wielded to reverse the crisis and rescue America's kids from familial breakdown. The conservative promise includes dozens of specific policies to accomplish this existential task. Some are obvious and long-standing goals, like eliminating marriage penalties in federal welfare programs and the tax code, and installing work requirements for food stamps. But we must go further. It is time for policymakers to elevate family authority, formation, and cohesion as their top priority, and even use government power, including through the tax code, to restore the American family. Today, the left is threatening the tax-exempt status of churches and charities that reject woke progressivism. They will soon turn to Christian schools and clubs with the same totalitarian intent. All right, let's dig in. I hold some slightly different beliefs than most people. That is going to be a problem for some people who have actually gotten this far into the video. Some of you are like, yeah, I agree with what this guy is saying, and you are about to fall off and click out of this video. I have done what I call an unconventional Bible study. I read through the Bible the same way that I am reading through this. We read through it, we talk about it. We read through it, and we talk about it, and we see what is actually in the book. We cut out all the hyperbole. And I hold some slightly different views. I'm not going to expound upon them here. If you are curious about them, you should check up here. And so some of the things in here I disagree with, but I agree that the American family is our priority. I don't, however, believe that it is what some people think of as traditional. Now, there have been same-sex relations as long as there have been people. You may not like that. You may find that offensive. You may think that that goes in the face of your God, but it doesn't through mine. And God takes opportunities to guide your life. He has a path and a destiny and something that you specifically were created to do. And sometimes that is to eat a penis. Sometimes dudes are wanting to smoke the sausage. You don't just choose one day to do that. You don't just say one day, hey, look, that looks nice. I'm going to put that in my mouth. You don't do that. If you do that, you were born that way, boss. If it has crossed your mind that, hey, you know what? I think I'm going to try that out. You were born with that. And it doesn't matter whether you think it is moral or not. I believe that God made you that way. I believe that God has given you the opportunity to have a wonderful, fulfilled life exactly the way that He made you, without fear of some eternal retribution, because He made you want to share your genitals with someone else. As long as it is adult consenting people, I have zero problems with it. I am a minister. And as a minister, I have performed same-sex marriages with zero problems. It was till death do they part. And you know what it was? They lived together. They had been together for 20 years. And they got married and they lived for another 10 years. And then one of them passed. It was till death do they part. And they had a better relationship than many straight people that I know. They lived a happy, full, fulfilled life, doing their thing the way that God created them to be. And so some people are going to take exception to that. Some people are going to get really, really butthurt about that, especially if you have not been through the Bible study. There is a reason I pointed out, because there's 160 something videos where I talk about this in great length, so I don't have to in other places. But the family is a problem, right? We have decided that it is better to pay people to be single. Most people are not gay, right? Most people are not. It is not a normal thing. I'm not saying it is. I'm not saying everybody should be that way, right? You are either that way or you're not. We need to cut out all of this playing, all of this creating things that are not. You were created the way that you were, and you cannot change that. You were created to have a partner. You were created to have a helpmeet. And for almost everybody, that is someone of the opposite sex. For almost everybody, one of the goals of life is to procreate and to keep going your line. And to be a good steward of that family, whether you are the man or the woman in that situation. You are to be a good steward of the children whose lives have been placed in your care. And we, as a society, have failed in that horribly. We have financially incentivized people to be single. We have made it a process by which you can get through your life by keeping children without parents. It is a horrible thing. So yes, we do need reform in that. But it is great to have these safety nets. I'm a disabled man. I didn't get this way by choice. I was struck from behind in a car wreck, and it left me unable to do the things that I used to do. I have been struggling since to find a grind that I can actually fulfill. This channel is part of that. It is me grinding to find my way. It is me finding my path because I believe in the American dream. I believe that taxes are a privilege, and I cannot wait until I pay my share of taxes. I believe that the church should be paying taxes. And that is separate from the fact that I have different beliefs. Whatever organization that you were part of, and if you were claiming to represent God, right, and you were claiming to represent the creator of all things for the betterment of all people, you cannot tell me that you should not be paying into your community. Well, that's double taxation. So what? You should be clamoring to contribute as much as you possibly can. I understand that then they would try to make the tax code overly burdensome. I get that. You should be not depositing the money for long, right? The money that comes into the church should be going out. Yes, pay your pastors. They don't need to be rich, right? Pay them for their grind. Absolutely. Absolutely. They should be provided for in a comfortable manner, not an extravagant one. If your church is one of these bajillionizers, you're doing it wrong. If you are a pastor and you have over a couple hundred people under your pastoral care, you are not doing something correctly. You want to know what it is? You are not raising the leadership. You are not bringing the leadership up to get another small church to compete with you. That's where you're failing. That's where the church is failing. That is where the church is falling apart, because it is in the small groups, the small families that can interact with each other. That is where God thrives. When you can be held accountable when you go to your church for doing things that you consider wrong. Now, I have a whole other list that most people do, but whatever you choose to be the measuring rod, you are going to be measured with. And so you should be holding everyone that you associate with in the name of God to that measure. It should be a clearly defined measure. You should all be using it, and you should all be holding it every single minute. That is what it means to serve God. It means to walk where you have been placed. And if you have been placed to walk in a business situation where everyone around you lies to the clients, you don't get to. You are set apart. That is why the church is failing. It has nothing to do with the government. It has nothing to do with the tax code. It has nothing to do with censorship. The church is failing because we, as the church, have failed our communities. We have people in our streets sleeping under trees. They are starving, or they are scrounging, and they're digging in garbage cans. And some of them are mentally ill. And we, the church, allow them to sleep out there as mentally ill people who cannot help themselves. We, the church, are doing that. That is why the church is failing. It is not because of the government. The government is prohibited from interfering with your free exercise of your religion. They are prohibited from interfering with you helping these people. But you, as the church, choose not to. You choose to instead build a basketball court with a whole nother deck because you got 1,000 people who are coming to Sunday school, but none of them are going out into the world. They walk down the aisle and they say a little prayer and they're good. They have no need to change their life at all. That is why the church is failing. It has nothing to do with the government. You should be paying your part. Give unto Caesar that which is Caesar's. Caesar has said, you hold on to that coin and you hold on to your tongue. That is why the church is failing. Give unto Caesar that which is Caesar. Give unto Caesar his due. And give unto God what is his. Stand for that which is right and true. Understand where you stand and understand why you stand there. Absolutely. But make sure you're on the right side of things. Make sure you are working in love. Make sure you are working for God, because that is why the church is failing. Don't come at me talking about, well, these people are doing this, so my church is failing. No, your church is failing because of you. That is why the church is failing, because you sit in the pew 3 times a week, but you go to work and you lie to your clients, and you go to the gas station and you take that extra 20 they gave you in change. That is why the church is failing. It has nothing to do with the government. The next conservative president must make the institutions of American civil society hard targets for woke culture warriors. This starts with deleting the terms sexual orientation and gender identity, diversity, equity, and inclusion, gender equality, gender equity, gender awareness, gender sensitive, abortion, reproductive health, reproductive rights, and any other term used to deprive Americans of their First Amendment rights out of every federal rule, agency, regulation, contract, grant, regulation, and piece of legislation that exists. Pornography manifested today in the omnipresent propagation of transgender ideology and sexualization of children, for instance, is not a political Gordian knot inextricably binding up disparate claims about free speech, property rights, sexual liberation, and child welfare. It has no claim to First Amendment protection. Its purveyors are child predators and misogynistic exploiters of women. Their product is as addictive as any illicit drug and as psychologically destructive as any crime. Pornography should be outlawed, and people who produce and distribute it should be imprisoned. Educators and public librarians who purvey it should be classed as registered sex offenders. And telecommunications and technology firms that facilitate its spread should be shuttered. In our schools, the question of parental authority over their children's education is a simple one. Schools serve parents, not the other way around. That is, of course, the best argument for universal school choice, a goal of all conservatives and conservative presidents must pursue. But even before we achieve that long-term goal, parents' rights as their children's primary educators should be non-negotiable in American schools. States, cities, and counties, school boards, union bosses, principals, and teachers who disagree should be immediately cut off from federal funds. The noxious tenets of critical race theory and gender ideology should be excised from curricula in every public school in the country. These theories poison our children, who are being taught on the one hand to affirm that the color of their skin fundamentally determines their identity and even their moral status, while on the other they are taught to deny the very creatureliness that inheres in being human, and consist in accepting the givenness of our nature as men and women. Allowing parents or physicians to reassign the sex of a minor is child abuse, and must end. For public institutions to use taxpayer dollars to declare the superiority and inferiority of certain races, sexes, and religions is a violation of the Constitution and civil rights law and cannot be tolerated by any government anywhere in the country. But the pro-family promises expressed in this book and central to the next conservative president's agenda must go much further than the traditional narrow definition of family issues. Every threat to family stability must be confronted. All right, so let's bite off this chunk. I do agree that DEI, as it stands, is killing us. The fact that there are people who make decisions based upon melanin is absolutely insane to me. And I used to be there. I have told my story before. Let me tell it again. Racism was not a stranger in the house in which I grew up. But it is a stranger in the house in which my children grew up. I am a child of the 90s. I am Gen X, baby. And I'm here to tell you, I don't care what color you are. It makes zero F's to me what God has chosen to give you as your set of challenges. Whether it is your genitalia or what you choose to do with them, or if it is your skin tone and the texture of your hair and what that has to do with how you have a lived experience. Those are all real things. People are here for the experience, and therefore they all have different ones, and people have chosen different levels of challenge, and that is all real things. And so, to me, it is absolutely ridiculous to emphasize the color of your skin. I think it's kind of wild. Like, people out here confessing to be Christians and then judging by skin. That is insane to me. God made everyone. Are you saying God made a mistake? Are you saying that? Okay, I'm going to let it go. I have zero cut for the PDs, right? For the ones who are attracted to minors. None. If you are involved with a child, I take it very personally because it is a very personal issue to me. I have talked about that in my story before. But I was sexually abused. I was mentally abused. I was physically abused. I came from a pretty rough childhood. And so I have zero cut for those type of things. But the First Amendment does indeed protect you from the government restricting what you can say. In large part, you aren't allowed to physically threaten someone or to call for a direct action against someone. Those are not legally protected, but a lot of other things are. All them words that you don't like to hear, they're just as protected as the words that you really do like to hear. And so all of it's protected, whether I think it's detestable or not. Whether you think it's detestable or not. It should not be given to children. It should not be part of the public education. You should have the right to choose where you send your kids. I absolutely believe those things. But to tell someone else that they cannot consume something that they freely choose, that's a big problem for me. I believe in free will. I choose not to consume these things. That is my choice. God gave me that choice. How am I going to take that choice from someone else? That does not mean it should be freely accessible. It should not be without hoops and hurdles. I believe in protecting the kids. But that doesn't mean that somebody can't go and handle their business if they need to get a handle on things. It has actually saved some marriages, and you don't want to hear that either, but it is true. Some women have problems, and they cannot perform in that manner. And some men choose to stay with them anyway and take things into their own hands so that they can have a happy, healthy relationship without that issue being as big of an issue. And sometimes a little bit of inspiration can help with those things. It should never be your idol. You should not be looking forward to doing it all day, right? That is not a thing that should be happening, but life is about the balance. We talk about that a lot. All right, let's dig into the next part. This resolve should color each of our policies. Consider our approach to big tech. The worst of these companies prey on children, like drug dealers, to get them addicted to their mobile apps. Many Silicon Valley executives famously don't let their own kids have smartphones. They, nevertheless, make billions of dollars addicting other people's children to theirs. TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and other social media platforms are specifically designed to create the digital dependencies that fuel mental illness and anxiety, to fray children's bonds with their parents and siblings. Federal policy cannot allow this industrial-scale child abuse to continue. Finally, conservatives should gratefully celebrate the greatest pro-family win in a generation, overturning Roe v. Wade, a decision that for 5 decades made a mockery of our Constitution and facilitated the deaths of tens of millions of unborn children. But the Dobbs decision is just the beginning. Conservatives in the states and in Washington, including in the next conservative administration, should push as hard as possible to protect the unborn in every jurisdiction in America. In particular, the next conservative president should work with Congress to enact the most robust protections for the unborn that Congress will support, while deploying existing federal powers to protect innocent life and vigorously complying with statutory bans on the federal funding of abortion. Conservatives should ardently pursue these pro-life and pro-family policies while recognizing that the many women who find themselves in immensely difficult and often tragic situations and the heroism of every choice to become a mother. Alternative options to abortion, especially adoption, should receive federal and state support. In summary, the next president has a moral responsibility to lead the nation in restoring the culture of life in America again. And that is the end of promise number 1. And this is one that I personally have only recently become more firm upon. All right. The abortion issue is a big one. It is a very big moral decision. And for me, you should be free to morally decide things, right? Whether it is drinking, whether it is smoking pot or cigarettes, whether it is cussing at the guy that cut you off on the interstate. Those are all moral choices that you should be taking control of. And so I have a problem with restriction, in large part for a lot of things. It does come down to this, though. Are you actually killing something? And yes, so for me, it becomes less of an issue, right? For me, but it was never an issue for me anyway, because I'm not getting one, obviously. My wife's not, obviously. But my children, they're morally in the way that they wouldn't, right? Trust me when I tell you I understand the rape situation. We are not going to talk about that, but it is in just the tip. And so I understand all of the arguments, but it is a life, right? It is a life that began the moment of fertilization. Once it began a symbiotic life of creating itself again. Once it started replicating itself along the DNA combination that just happened, it's a life. And so I have a problem with killing a life. It is what it is. Now, I understand the extreme situations. Nobody should have to sacrifice their life if it is a medical situation in which the mother's life is in danger. Of course, the mother can make the decision to protect herself. Absolutely. All the way up to the end. I hate that, but it's true. But if the baby is viable, if it can live on the outside by itself, then you have less of a leg to stand on. And you're doing medically wonderful things with really young children before they are born, right? So they can take them out way earlier, and they can still flourish way earlier than was ever possible before. This is one of those things that really is not up to the federal government, right? It was meant to be 50 separate independent states according to the Federalist Papers. So that the fact that it went back to the states, to me, is where it should be. And if you don't agree morally with where your state is, then you should move to a different state, right? If you are not going to be able to affect the change, it should not be done by mandate from a national level. And that is hard for me to say, because I do believe it is killing, right? If your state is pro-killing, I am not going to go there. There are circumstances where life should be taken, right? Rehabilitation is not possible for all prisoners, and in that case, they should not be kept on the mercy of the state. That should not happen. You should be tried, swiftly convicted, swiftly appeal, and swiftly have the end, right? And so, let's get into promise number 2, because this is going to be a long one today. Dismantle the administrative state and return self-governance to the American people. Of course, the surest way to put the federal government back to work for the American people is to reduce its size and scope back to something resembling the original constitutional intent. Conservatives desire a smaller government, not for its own sake, but for the sake of human flourishing. But the Washington establishment doesn't want a constitutionally limited government because it means they lose power and are held more accountable by the people who put them in power. Like restoring popular sovereignty, the task of reattaching the federal government's constitutional and democratic tethers calls to mind Ronald Reagan's observation that there are no easy answers, but there are simple answers. In the case of making the federal government smaller, more effective, and accountable, the simple answer is the Constitution itself. The surest proof of this is how strenuously and creatively generations of progressives and many Republican insiders have worked to cut themselves free from the strictures of the 1789 Constitution and subsequent amendments. Consider the federal budget. Under current law, Congress is required to pass a budget and a 12-issue specific spending bills comporting with it every single year. The last time Congress did so was in 1996. Congress no longer meaningfully budgets, authorizes, or categorizes spending. I'm not going to stop on this page. We're going to read on because it's getting long, and it's all going to go in the same direction. So, instead, party leaders negotiate one multi-trillion-dollar spending bill, several thousand pages long, and then vote on it before anyone, literally, has had a chance to read it. Debate time is restricted, amendments are prohibited, and all of this is backed up against a midnight deadline when the previous omnibus spending bill will run out and the federal government shuts down. The process is not designed to empower 330 million American citizens, and their elected representatives, but rather to empower the political elites to secretly negotiating without any public scrutiny or oversight. In the end, congressional leaders' behavior and incentives here are no different from those of global elites, insulating policy decisions over the climate, trade, public health, you name it, from the sovereignty of national electorates. Public scrutiny and democratic accountability make life harder for policymakers, so they skirt it. It's not a dysfunction, it's corruption. And despite its gaudy price tag, the federal budget is not even close to the worst example of this corruption. That distinction belongs to the administrative state, the dismantling of which must be a top priority for the next conservative president. The term administrative state refers to the policy-making work done by the bureaucracies of all the federal government's departments, agencies, and millions of employees. Under Article 1 of the Constitution, all legislative powers herein granted shall be vested in a Congress of the United States, which shall consist of a Senate and a House of Representatives. That is, federal law is enacted only by elected legislators in both houses of Congress. This exclusive authority was part of the framers' doctrine of separated powers. They not only split the federal government's legislative, executive, and judicial powers into different branches, they also gave each branch checks over the others. Under our Constitution, the legislative branch, Congress, is far and away the most powerful, and correspondingly the most accountable to the people. I went through all of these details in the Federalist Papers and the Constitutional Playlist. In recent decades, members of the House and Senate discovered that if they give away that power to the Article 2 branch of the government, they can also deny responsibility for its actions. So, today, in Washington, most policy is no longer set by Congress at all, but by the administrative state. Given the choice between being powerful but vulnerable, or irrelevant but famous, most members of Congress have chosen the latter. Congress passes unintentionally vague laws that delegate decision-making over a given issue to a federal agency. That agency's bureaucrats, not just unelected but seemingly unfireable, then leap at the chance to fill in the vacuum created by Congress's preening cowardice. I like that. The federal government is growing larger and less constitutionally accountable, even to the president, every year. A combination of elected and unelected bureaucrats at the Environmental Protection Agency quietly strangles the domestic energy production through difficult-to-understand rulemaking processes. Bureaucrats at the Department of Homeland Security, following the lead of a feckless administration, border, and immigration enforcement agencies to help migrants criminally enter our country with impunity. Bureaucrats at the Department of Education inject racist, anti-American, ahistorical propaganda into America's classrooms. Bureaucrats at the Department of Justice force school districts to undermine girls' sports and parents' rights to satisfy transgender extremists. Woke bureaucrats at the Pentagon force troops to attend training seminars about white privilege. And bureaucrats at the State Department infuse U.S. foreign aid programs with woke extremism about intersectionality and abortion. Unaccountable federal spending is the secret lifeblood of the Great Awakening. Nearly every power center held by the left is funded or supported one way or another through the bureaucracy of Congress. Colleges and school districts are funded by tax dollars. The administrative state holds 100% of its power at the sufferance of Congress, and its insulation from the presidential discipline is an unconstitutional fairy tale spun by the Washington establishment to protect its turf. Members of Congress shield themselves from constitutional accountability, often when the White House allows them to get away with it. Cultural institutions like public libraries and public health agencies are only as independent from public accountability as elected officials and voters permit. Let's be clear. The most egregious regulations promulgated by the current administration come from one place, the Oval Office. The president cannot hide behind the agencies. As his many executive orders make clear, he is the responsibility for the regulations that threaten American communities, schools, and families. A conservative president must move swiftly to do away with these vast abuses of presidential power and remove the career and political bureaucrats who fuel it. Properly considered, restoring fiscal limits and constitutional accountability to the federal government is a continuation of restoring national sovereignty to the American people. In foreign affairs, global strategy, federal budgeting, and policymaking, the same pattern emerges again and again. Ruling elites slash and tear at restrictions and accountability placed on them. They centralize power up and away from the American people, to supranational treaties and organizations, to left-wing experts, to sight unseen all-or-nothing legislating, to the unelected career bureaucrats of the administrative state. As monolithic as the left's institutional power appears to be, it originates with appropriations from Congress and is made complete by a feckless president. A conservative president must look to the legislative branch for decisive action. The administrative state is not going anywhere until Congress acts to retrieve its own power from bureaucrats in the White House. But, in the meantime, there are many executive tools a courageous conservative president can use to handcuff the bureaucracy, push Congress to return to its constitutional responsibility, restore power over Washington to the American people, bring the administrative state to heel, and, in the process, defang and defund the woke culture warriors who have infiltrated every last institution in America. The conservative promise lays out how to use many of these tools, including how to fire supposedly unfireable federal bureaucrats, how to shutter wasteful and corrupt bureaus and offices, how to muzzle woke propaganda at every level of government, how to restore the American people's constitutional authority over the administrative state, and how to save untold taxpayer dollars in the process. Finally, the president can restore public confidence and accountability to our most important government function of all, national defense. The American people desire a military full of highly skilled servicemen and women who can protect the homeland and our interest overseas. The next conservative president must end the left's social experimentation with the military, restore warfighting as its sole mission, and set defeating the threat of the Chinese Communist Party as its highest priority. The next conservative president must possess the courage to relentlessly put the interest of the everyday American over the desires of the ruling elite. Their outrage cannot be prevented, it must simply be ignored. And it can be. The left derives its power from the institutions they control, but those institutions are only powerful to the extent that the constitutional officers surrender their own legitimate authority to them. A president who refuses to do so and uses his or her office to reimpose constitutional authority over federal policymaking can begin to correct decades of corruption and remove thousands of bureaucrats from the positions of public trust they have so long abused. And so, for the most part, I agree. Like, there are parts that I don't. I don't see China as the threat that most people do. I believe that if we were manufacturing here, China would be less of a threat than they are now. I understand that issue is going to step on a lot of toes because communism will implode. The only reason that they are even still a thing is because we bring all their stuff here and buy it because it's cheap. It's because of Walmart that China is even alive. That the Communist Party would have dissipated years ago if they would have forced to rely upon their own innovations and technologies. Like, communism is not a place where growth happens. It's not a place where new concepts start. And so I don't see them as the threat. I don't. I think that if we were more concerned with ourselves, with making America first, America great again here, then they aren't the problem anymore. I don't believe that we should be the world police. I believe we should have the best military, the best equipped, the most powerful, the largest, all of that, and never use it. I think we should pay for them to go and play war games all the time. And in the rare case that we do need to use them with overwhelming force. And then stop. We're not police. We are the SWAT team. We go in, we break shit up, we let the rest of the people handle it. That's how it should happen. It should not be us saying, no, we're going to keep a base here forever just to make sure you toe the line. I understand forward deployment. I was forward deployed. I think forward deployment's a good thing. But it is vastly overused. It is vastly overused. And so I think we would be better served to have those boys back home on the border with live rounds to keep things the way it should be. Nobody should be coming through illegally. Nobody should be facilitated by the government. They should be ventilated by the government. That's just how I feel about it. There are numerous points of entry where you can come by legally. I think we should take in everybody we can legally. Right? That means by policy. All right, let's get to Promise 3, defending our nation's sovereignty, borders, and bounty against global threats. Continuing on from what I was just talking about. The United States belongs to we the people. All government authority derives from the consent of the people, and our nation's success derives from the character of its people. The American people's right to rule ourselves is the obverse of our duty. We cannot outsource to others our obligation to ensure the conditions that allow our families, local communities, churches and synagogues, and neighborhoods to thrive. The buck stops with each of us, so each of us must have the freedom to pursue the good for ourselves and those entrusted to our care. To most Americans, this is common sense, but in Washington, D.C. and other centers of leftist power, like the media and the academy, this statement of basic civics is branded hate speech. Progressive elites speak in lofty terms of openness, progress, expertise, cooperation, and globalization. But, too often, these terms are just rhetorical Trojan horses, concealing their true intention, stripping we the people of our constitutional authority over our country's future. America's corporate and political elites do not believe in the ideals to which our nation is dedicated: self-governance, the rule of law, and ordered liberty. They certainly do not trust the American people, and they disdain the Constitution's restrictions on their ambitions. Instead, they believe in a kind of 21st century Wilsonian order in which the enlightened, highly educated managerial elite run things, rather than the humble, patriotic working families who make up the majority of what elites contemptuously call flyover country. This Wilsonian hubris has spread like a cancer through many of America's largest corporations, its public institutions, and its popular culture. Those who run our so-called American corporations have bent to the will of the woke agenda and care more for their foreign investors and organizations than their American workers and customers. Today, nearly every top-tier U.S. university president or Wall Street hedge fund manager has more in common with a socialist European head of state than with the parents at the high school football game in Waco, Texas. Many elites' entire identity, it seems, is wrapped up in their sense of superiority over those people. But under our Constitution, they are the mere equals of the workers who shower after work instead of before. This is, as it should and must be, intellectual sophistication, advanced degrees, financial success, and all the other markers of elite status have no bearing on a person's knowledge of the one thing most necessary for governance, what it means to live well. That knowledge is available to each of us, no matter how humble our backgrounds or how unpretentious our attainments. It is open to us to read in the book of human nature, to which we are all offered the key just by merit of our shared humanity. One of the great premises of American political life is that everyone who can read in that book must have a voice in deciding the course and fate of our republic. Progressive policymakers and pundits in America either fail to understand this premise or intentionally reject it. They enthusiastically support supranational organizations like the United Nations and the European Union, which are run and staffed almost entirely by people who share their values and are mostly insulated from the influence of national elections. That's why they are eager for America to sign international treaties on everything from pharmaceutical patents to climate change to the rights of the child, and why those treaties invariably endorse policies that could never pass through the U.S. Congress. Like the progressive Woodrow Wilson a century ago, the woke left today seeks a world bound by global treaties they write, in which they exercise dictatorial powers over all nations without being subject to democratic accountability. That's why today's progressive leftist so cavalierly supports open borders, despite the lawless humanitarian crisis their policy created along America's southern border. They seek to purge the very concept of the nation-state from the American ethos, no matter how much crime increases or resources drop for schools and hospitals, or wages decrease for the working class. Open borders activism is a classic example of what the German theologian Dietrich Bonhoeffer called cheap grace, publicly promoting one's own virtue without risking any personal inconvenience. Indeed, the only direct impact of open borders on pro-open borders elites is that the constant flow of illegal immigration suppresses the wages of their housekeepers, landscapers, and busboys. Cheap grace aptly describes the left's love affair with environmental extremism. Those who suffer most from the policies environmentalism would have us enact are the aged, poor, and vulnerable. It is not a political cause, but a pseudo-religion meant to baptize liberals' ruthless pursuit of absolute power in the holy water of environmental virtue. At its very heart, environmental extremism is decidedly anti-human. Stewardship and conservation are supplanted by population control and economic regression. Environmental ideologues would ban the fuels that run almost all of the world's cars, planes, factories, farms, and electricity grids, abandoning confidence in human resilience and creativity in responding to the challenges of the future would raise impediments to the most meaningful human activities. They would stand human affairs on their head, regarding human activity itself as fundamentally a threat to be sacrificed to the God of nature. The same goals are the heart of elite support for economic globalization. For 30 years, America's political, economic, and cultural leaders embraced and enriched Communist China and its genocidal Communist Party, while hollowing out America's industrial base, what I was just talking about. What may have started out with good intentions has now been made clear. Unfettered trade with China has been a catastrophe. It has made a handful of American corporations enormously profitable, while twisting their business incentives away from the American people's needs. For a generation, politicians of both parties promised that engagement with Beijing would grow our economy while injecting American values into China. The opposite has happened. American factories have closed. Jobs have been outsourced. Our manufacturing economy has been financialized. And all along, the corporations profiting failed to export our values of human rights and freedom. Rather, they imported China's anti-American values into their C-suites. Even before the rise of big tech, Wall Street ignored China's serial theft of America's intellectual property. It outright cheered the elimination of American manufacturing jobs. Learn to code, they would gloat. These were just the price of progress. Engagement was, at every step, Beijing's project, not America's. The Chinese Communist Party dictated terms only to break them whenever it suited them. They stole our technology, spied on our people, and threatened our allies, all with trillions of dollars of wealthy and military power financed by their access to our market. Then came the rise of big tech, which is now less a contributor to the U.S. economy than it is a tool of China's government. In exchange for cheap labor and regulatory special treatment from Beijing, America's largest technology firms funnel data about Americans to the CCP. They hand over sensitive intellectual property with military and intelligence applications to keep the money rolling in. They let Beijing censor Chinese users on their platform. They let the CCP set their corporate policies about mobile apps. They run interference on our rivals' political priorities in Washington. One side of big tech companies' business model is old-fashioned American competitiveness and world-changing technological innovation. But increasingly, that side of those businesses is overshadowed by their role as operatives in the lucrative employ of America's most dangerous international enemy. If you want to understand the danger posed by collaboration between big tech and the CCP, look no further than TikTok, the highly addictive video app used by 80 million Americans every month and overwhelmingly popular among teenage girls, is in effect a tool of Chinese espionage. The ties between TikTok and the Chinese government are not loose, and they are not coincidental. The same can be observed in many U.S. colleges and universities. Through the CCP's Confucius Institutes, Beijing has been just as successful at compromising and co-opting our higher education system as they have at compromising and co-opting corporate America. A casual reader might take the last few pages as surveying a broad array of challenges facing the American people and the next conservative president. Supranational policymaking, border security, globalization, engagement with China, manufacturing, big tech, and Beijing compromised colleges. But these are not really many issues, but two. That China is a totalitarian enemy of the United States, not a strategic partner or fair competitor. And two, that America's elites have betrayed the American people. The solution to all of the above problems is not to tinker with this or that government program, to replace this or that bureaucrat. These are problems not of technocratic efficiency, but of national sovereignty and constitutional governance. We solve them not by trimming and reshaping the leaves, but by ripping out the trees, root and branch. International organizations and agreements that erode our Constitution, rule of law, or popular sovereignty should not be reformed. They should be abandoned. Illegal immigration should be ended, not mitigated. The borders sealed, not reprioritized. Economic engagement should be ended, not rethought. Our manufacturing and industrial base should be restored, not allowed to deteriorate further. Confucius Institutes, TikTok, and any other arm of Chinese propaganda and espionage should be outlawed, not merely monitored. Universities taking money from the CCP should lose their accreditation, charters, and eligibility for federal funds. The next conservative president should go beyond merely defending America's energy interests, but go on the offense, asserting them around the world. America's vast reserves of oil and natural gas are not an environmental problem. They are the lifeblood of economic growth. American dominance of the global energy market would be a good thing for the world and, for more importantly, for we the people. It's not just about jobs, even though unleashing domestic energy production would create millions of them. It's not just about higher wages for workers who didn't go to college, though they would receive the raises they have missed out on for 2 generations. Full spectrum strategic energy dominance would facilitate the reinvigoration of America's entire industrial and manufacturing sector as we disentangle our economy from China. Globally, it would rebalance power away from dangerous regimes in Russia and the Middle East. It would build powerful alliances with fast growing nations in Africa and provide us the leverage to counter Chinese ambitions in South America and the Pacific. Locally, it would drive billions of dollars of private investment to the communities that have been hammered by globalization since the 1990s. And it would clarify our intentions to Beijing that the next president can ensure that a large part of America's reindustrialization is in the production of the equipment we will need to dissuade future foreign meddling with U.S. vital interests. And so ends promise number 3, which, in large part, according to me, could have been handled in promise number 2, because China is not a threat to us unless we allow them to be. Like, they can steal our tech because we make our tech over there. If we were doing our manufacturing here in a clean, responsible way, because pollution is bad. Not because of any world-changing effects, but because it is terrible to have to breathe smog. I remember acid rain. I remember regulations coming into play that were actually a good thing. I remember when people could not swim in the Potomac or the Mississippi or many, many other rivers across the nation when there were tires and junk and trash. I remember all of these things. It is not some figment of somebody's imagination. We do need regulations to keep us clean, but that's about it. We should be manufacturing here. We should be doing it in a way that makes the rest of the world envious. We should be producing more than anyone. We have enough resources to fully sustain ourselves and to export wealth elsewhere. We can do these things, but we can only do them if we are, indeed, a sovereign nation making sovereign decisions and allowing the rest of the world to make theirs. I understand that there is global markets. There will always be global markets. But we do not need the hyper-regulation of the global markets in the way that we currently have them. The same goes for Russia. Russia just wants to do Russia. They don't want to do the rest of the world. China wants to do China and Taiwan. But they're not interested in global expansion. At least currently. They're not capable of it. So we need to be focused more on spending our money in better places than bombs. I personally am a big advocate of space exploration. I think we should be getting out there more, spending more of our money doing that instead of building bombs. It is a better investment. It improves our science and technology in a way that is beneficial to life as opposed to harmful. Promise number 4. Secure our God-given individual right to enjoy the blessing of liberty. The Declaration of Independence famously asserted the belief of Americans' founders that all men are created equal and endowed with God-given rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It's the pursuit of happiness, that is central to America's heroic experiment in self-government. When the founders spoke of pursuit of happiness, what they meant might be understood today as, in essence, pursuit of blessedness. That is, an individual must be free to live as his Creator ordained, to flourish. Our Constitution grants each of us the liberty to do not what we want, but what we ought. This pursuit of the good life is found primarily in family, marriage, children, Thanksgiving dinners, and the like. Many find happiness through their work. Think of dedicated teachers or healthcare professionals, entrepreneurs or plumbers, throwing themselves into their businesses. Anyone who sees a job well done as a personal reward. Religious devotion and spirituality are the greatest sources of happiness around the world. Still, others find themselves happiness in their local voluntary communities of friends, their neighbors, their civic or charitable work. The American Republic was founded on principles prioritizing and maximizing individuals' rights to live their best life or enjoy what the framers called the blessings of liberty. It's this radical equality, liberty for all, not just of rights but of authority, that the rich and powerful have hated about democracy in America since 1776. They resent Americans' audacity in insisting that we don't need them to tell us how to live. It's this inalienable right of self-direction, of each person's opportunity to direct himself or herself and his or her community to the good, that the ruling class disdains. With the Declaration and Constitution, our nation's founders handed to us the means with which to preserve this right. Abraham Lincoln wrote of the Declaration as an apple of gold in a silver frame, the Constitution. So must the next conservative president look to these documents when the elites mount their next assault on liberty. Left to our own devices, the American people rejected European monarchy and colonialism just as we rejected slavery, second-class citizenship for women, mercantilism, socialism, Wilsonian globalism, fascism, communism, and today wokeism. To the left, these assertions of patriotic self-assurance are just so many signs of our moral depravity and intellectual inferiority. Proof that, in fact, we need a ruling elite making decisions for us. But the next conservative president should be proud, not ashamed of Americans' unique culture of social equality and ordered liberty. After all, the countries where Marxist elites have won political and economic power are all weaker, poorer, and less free for it. The United States remains the most innovative and upwardly mobile society in the world. Government should stop trying to substitute its own preferences for those of the people. And the next conservative president should champion the dynamic genius of free enterprise against the grim miseries of elite-directed socialism. The promise of socialism, communism, Marxism, progressivism, fascism, whatever name it chooses, is simple. Government control of the economy can ensure equal outcomes for all people. The problem is that it has never done so. There is no such thing as the government. There are just people who work for the government and wield its power and who, at almost every opportunity, wield it to serve themselves first, and everyone else a distant second. This is not a failing of one nation or socialist party, but inherent in human nature. Nighttime satellite images of the Korean Peninsula famously show the free market South lit up with homes, businesses, and cities electrified from coast to coast. By contrast, communist North Korea is almost completely dark, except for the small dot of the capital city, Pyongyang, where the psychotic dictator and his cronies live. This same phenomena is on display in the infuriating fact that 4 of the 6 richest counties in the United States are suburbs of Washington, D.C., a city infamous for its lack of native productive industries. We see the same corruption expressed on an individual level whenever billionaire climate activists who want to outlaw carbon-fueled transportation fly to A-list conferences on their private jets, or when the 19 shutdown politicians like former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi and California Governor Gavin Newsom were caught at the hair salon or dining at fancy restaurants after moralizing about how everyone else must stay home and forgo such luxuries during the pandemic. For socialists, who are almost always well-to-do, socialism is not a means of equalizing outcomes, but a means of accumulating power. They never get around to helping anyone else. The Soviet Empire was a social and economic failure. North Korea, despite the opulence of its tyrants, is one of the poorest nations in the world. Cuba is so corrupt that its people regularly risk their lives to escape to Florida on rafts. Venezuela was once the richest nation in South America. Today, a decade after Marxist dictator took over, 94% of Venezuelans live in poverty. Even Socialist Senator Bernie Sanders' home state of Vermont was forced to repeal the state's single-payer health care system just 3 years after creating it. In every case, socialist elites promised that if only they could direct the economy, everything would be better. Very quickly, everything got worse. In socialist nation after socialist nation, the only way the government could keep its disgruntled people in line was to surveil and terrorize them. By contrast, in countries with a high degree of economic freedom, elites are not in charge because everyone is in charge. People work, build, invest, save, and create according to their own interest and in service to the common good of their fellow citizens. There is a reason why the private economy hews to the maxim, the customer is always right, while government bureaucracies are notoriously user-unfriendly. Just as there is a reason why private charities are cheerful and government welfare systems are not. It's not because the grocery store clerks and PTA moms are good and federal bureaucrats are bad. It's because private enterprises, for profit or nonprofit, must cooperate to give to succeed. So, as the American people take back their sovereignty, constitutional authority, respect for their family and communities, they should also take back their right to pursue the good life. The next president should promote pro-growth economic policies that spur new jobs and investment, higher wages and productivity. Yes, that agenda should include overdue tax and regulatory reform, but it should go further and include antitrust enforcement against corporate monopolies. It should promote educational opportunities outside of the woke-dominated system of public schools and universities, including trade schools, apprenticeship programs, and student loan alternatives that fund student streams instead of Marxist academics. Just as important as expanding opportunities for workers and small businesses, the next president should crack down on the crony capitalist corruption that enables America's largest corporations to profit through political influence rather than through competitive enterprise and customer satisfaction. Analogous pro-growth reforms for America's voluntary civil society are also in order. America is not an economy, it is a country. Economic freedom is not the only important freedom. Freedom of religion, freedom of speech, and the freedom to assemble also represent key components to the American promise. Today, in addition to the problem of big tech censorship, we see speakers at universities shouted down, parents investigated and arrested for attempting to speak at school board meetings, and donors to conservative causes harassed and intimidated. The next conservative president must defend our First Amendment rights. That's a state issue. Best effort. Ultimately, the left does not believe that all men are created equal. They think they are special. They certainly don't think all people have unalienable rights to pursue the good life. They think only they themselves have such a right, along with a moral responsibility to make decisions for everyone else. They don't think any citizen, state, business, church, or charity should be allowed any freedom until they first bend the knee. This book, this agenda, the entire Project 2025 is a plan to unite the conservative movement and the American people against elite rule and woke culture warriors. Our movement has not been united in recent years, and our country has paid the price. In the past decade, though, the breakdown of the family, the rise of China, the Great Awakening, big tech's abuses, the erosion of constitutional accountability in Washington have rendered these divisions not just inconvenient but politically suicidal. Every hour the left directs federal policy and elite institutions, our sovereignty, our Constitution, our families, and our freedom are a step closer to disappearing. Conservatives have just 2 years and one shot to get this right. With enemies at home and abroad, there is no margin for error. Time is running short. If we fail, the fight for the very idea of America may be lost. But we should take this small window of opportunity we have left to act with courage and confidence, not despair. The last time our nation and movement were so near defeat, we rallied together behind a great leader and great ideas, transcended our differences, rescued our nation, and changed the world. It's time to do it again. Now, as then, we know who we are fighting and what we are fighting for our republic, our freedom, and for each other. The next conservative president will enter office on January the 20th of 2025 with a simple choice: greatness or failure. It will be a daunting test, but no more so than every generation of Americans has faced and passed. The conservative promise represents the best effort of the conservative movement in 2023, and the next conservative president's last opportunity to save our republic. And so ends the foreword and promise for. And again, I don't have a whole lot to disagree with in this. There are points that I do disagree with, but I'm sure we will talk about them more as we're getting through, and it's getting a little bit longer than I normally do. I am a big proponent of self-determination. The American dream is not to own a house. It is not to have a chicken in your pot. It is the ability to pursue the thing that you want with your life freely. To not have to ask somebody if you can move. It is the ability to choose what job that you want to do and to earnestly and vigorously strive to do the best you can and to succeed or fail at your own discretion. That is the American dream. I believe in self-determination and grabbing, right? I love our safety nets. I use our safety net. But I am trying, striving, and dreaming to get off of it. I am pushing myself. I'm holding myself responsible. We go through these things that I have in these playlists so that I am energetically investing in the freedom of our country. I believe that by reading aloud from the Constitution and the Federalist Papers, that I invested my energy into this country. People are watching these. Not many. I get it. It's long. It's boring. It's reading. Okay. But people are watching them all the way through. People are absorbing my energy and understanding my point of view and what I am talking about. And I am talking about responsibility. I'm talking about grabbing the reins of your greater purpose and the responsibility for yourself and those around you so that we can all rise together. I am America first. I am 100%. I believe that we could take in more states. I'm that guy. We could do away with the Monroe Doctrine. We could take in all of North America if they wanted. All of South America if they wanted. We could take in African states. I don't care. If they agree to take our Constitution and to abide by our laws that are decided in Congress by us, I am fully in support of more people being with us. It should not be by force. It should not be by coercion. It should not be by subterfuge. We should be such a shining example that everyone around us is like, hey, can we get some of that? And be like, yeah, bet. Sign on the dotted line. You will abide by the Constitution of the United States of America. Let's ratify this. Get it through Congress and the Senate. Let's have the president sign off on it. Welcome to here, state of Tijuana, right? I'm fully on board with that. But it has to be our laws. It has to be our Constitution. And in order for that to be a thing, we have to do it here first. We don't follow our own Constitution. We're supposed to be 50 independent states. There's not supposed to be an FDA. There's not supposed to be, I understand the need for the EPA because smog was a thing. But they vastly overstepped their bounds. Vastly. And that's for a different video. Hopefully I brought a little bit of enlightenment and not too much confusion to some very complicated topics. I know that I hold some unconventional beliefs. I tend to step on toes when I give my beliefs, but that is not intentional, nor is it apologized for. I am who I am. I am a fully conscious, patriotic American. I am 2024 MAGA, baby. Let's go Trump train. I'm fully on board with that. But you have the choice. You have to be informed for your own decisions. Make sure that you are. If you like what I'm doing here, let me know down below. Hit me with a like, share, and a sub. Throw me a comment. Let me know it's appreciated because I'm here for you. If you really appreciate it, hit me with the super thanks. It will be greatly appreciated. To the crew, thanks for hanging out. I appreciate every single minute that you are here with me. And I am praying for you every single day. Until next time, I love you. God loves you. You are perfect, whole, and complete just the way that you are. This has been Pitt State. Peace.